Hypothermia, that insidious thief of warmth, has haunted humanity since our earliest days. It is an enemy as old as the species itself, striking not with a blow or a blade, but through the slow and merciless draining of the body's precious heat. To face this ancient spectre, our ancestors developed an array of responses, from huddling together for warmth to harnessing fire itself. But one adaptation, subtle and yet profound, was the early adoption of protective coverings, rudimentary clothing, if you will, crafted from the pelts and hides of animals. And it is precisely in this development that we find the roots of a strange and tragic behavior that lingers within us today: paradoxical undressing. The notion that our early ancestors were running naked across the African savannas is an oversimplification, and one that doesn't quite do justice to their ingenuity. As early hominids, we were using basic coverings long before we had anything like what we would recognize as tailored clothing today. Simple animal pelts or wraps were used to provide insulation and protection, especially during cool nights or inclement weather. These rudimentary garments offered the most elementary buffer against the fluctuations in temperature that even our relatively warm and temperate environments could deliver. And here lies the paradox. Once you start to insulate the body, even crudely, you also have to learn to manage the risks that come with these coverings, especially when they become wet. Our ancestors, finding themselves cold and shivering from rain or river crossings, faced a profound challenge. A soaked animal pelt was not just useless as insulation, it became a liability, conducting heat away from the body and accelerating the loss of warmth through evaporation. In such situations, the best option for survival would often have been to remove that soaked pelt and let the body breathe, using whatever ambient warmth remained. And it is here, in these early experiments with clothing, that the rule became established: remove wet layers. In the African savannas, where temperatures could cool considerably at night but would warm again with the dawn, removing soaked coverings could be a life-saving decision, allowing the individual to survive until the sun began to rise. This response to hypothermia was primitive but elegant in its own way. It allowed our ancestors to navigate the danger posed by wet, heat-stealing layers, which, in moderate climates, could be the deciding factor between surviving the night or succumbing to the chill. To remove a soaked pelt when the body was chilled was an instinct that had clear adaptive value, at least in the environment of our evolution. The warmth of the coming day was often guaranteed, and shedding coverings could reduce ongoing heat loss. Fast forward to today, and the instinct persists. Yet humanity is no longer confined to the savannas. We are, for better or worse, a species that has ignored all biological caution and taken up residence in climates wildly outside of our original adaptive range. We occupy places with brutal winters, with icy winds that strip the warmth from any exposed skin, and where the morning sun does not always bring comfort or warmth. Here the instinct to remove wet layers becomes a misfiring, a tragic and cruel irony that has been dubbed paradoxical undressing. In the final stages of hypothermia, the mind enters a confused state. In a desperate bid to preserve some semblance of equilibrium, the body sends signals that trigger a feeling of overwhelming warmth, often due to a sudden dilation of blood vessels as internal thermoregulation collapses. The sufferer, gripped by an illusion of heat, strips off their clothes, just as our ancestors might have done when soaked in the cold of an African night. But there is no warming savanna sun coming to save them now, only the unforgiving frost of modern winters, where exposed skin means death. What we see then is the ultimate irony of evolution. The instinct to undress when wet was shaped in a moderate climate, where the removal of wet furs could allow someone to survive long enough to feel the warmth of the coming day. It made perfect sense on the plains of Africa, but today in frozen mountains or in the depths of winter that same instinct can kill. We are still wired to follow an ancient rule that no longer applies to the extreme environments we have chosen to inhabit. And yet modern hikers still echo this ancient knowledge: remove wet layers. We hear it because it is true even today. Wet clothes are dangerous. They leach away warmth at an alarming rate. But the tragedy of paradoxical undressing is that the behavior kicks in when the mind is already lost to hypothermia's numbing grip, applying an instinctive solution without the necessary reasoning that should guide it. In the wrong environment, this reflex becomes a death sentence, not a survival strategy. It is a haunting reminder of our vulnerability, a vulnerability we have brought upon ourselves by spreading across every environment on Earth, regardless of how inhospitable. We carry within us instincts honed for another time, another place, and our modern context can render these instincts deadly. Our ancestors evolved to deliriously remove their coverings, perhaps to finally pass out and await the warmth of dawn. Today we suffer the throes of hypothermia under an indifferent sky, in icy environments that will not forgive the mistake. Paradoxical undressing, then, is not simply an odd quirk of human biology. It is a window into our evolutionary past, and a stark testament to the mismatch between the ancient environments that shaped our instincts and the world we now inhabit. It underscores a fundamental truth about humanity. We have pushed beyond our evolutionary origins, but we are still tethered to the behaviors that helped us survive in those ancient days. What once saved us now buries us in snowbanks and ice, waiting for a morning sun that will never bring warmth. And that, perhaps, is the truest irony of all.